Astrocast. I'm your host, Rue. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, and we are right into a fresh new crescent moon, just a few days old. I hope you've all been out and about under hopefully clear skies. I know that I have certainly been getting busy. I actually made it out to the observatory last week, which I was quite happy to do because it had been a little while since I've been there. And I, obviously am a big fan of everything that happens down there, but it's really just a special place for me to go whenever I've got a free night and I want to go down and, appreciate really nice skies, because where I live here in Charlotte, North Carolina, we do not have nice skies, unfortunately. We just recently had the terrible honor, I guess you could say, of moving from a Bortle 6 to a Bortle 7. So it is official now out here in Matthews, North Carolina, which is just like a small borough of Charlotte. We are now considered a 7, which is a shame because when I just moved into this house that me and my wife purchased about 2 years ago, we were a 6, and it has gotten even grayer outside, unfortunately. So thank you for joining this week. Obviously, I was not here last week, and there is a good reason for that. If you're currently listening, as per usual, through Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen, I do want to let you know this is our first week of having a video episode of the podcast. So if that's something that you would like to check out, please check the show notes, and I will have a link to the YouTube show where you can go and watch that. Just to cover a couple of quick things with this, the audio podcast is not going anywhere. That's obviously my bread and butter for the show. I invented it to be a podcast. I do realize there are plenty of YouTube channels out there to watch that probably cover a lot more interesting stuff and get out in the field and yada, yada, yada. This is still a podcast. I'm still going to be a talking head, giving you information about astronomy, giving you tips and tricks, etc. So nothing's going to change in that regard. My hope is to bring in more listeners, just because, YouTube has so many more listeners than a podcast generally does, except for, obviously your real popular podcasts have, millions of listeners, but that ain't me yet. But that being said, we are doing quite well, and I thought this would be a good way to spread the word a little bit and get people, watching the Astrocast a little bit more. So what am I going to do with this video, you might ask? I've got plans. One of the chief among them is I would like to be able to show you guys photos behind me as we go throughout the show. So sometimes there are also times when a visual aid would be incredibly helpful, if not 100% necessary. So when that does come along, I'll be glad to be able to give visual aids. And I'll obviously do my best to describe it as well for the audio only listeners. But it's just a little extra something that I thought that you guys might enjoy if you do tune into the show every week. And if you want to, share it with a friend or family member who might be interested in astronomy, I would greatly appreciate that. So all that being said, I do want to thank, we have a new 5th member to our Patreon, and he actually just joined yesterday. I shot him a quick message and I haven't gotten a response back. I sent him a link to the Discord server, because we do have a Discord server. So thank you so much to David for joining. We really appreciate that. And like I said, we're up to 5 Patreon subscribers now. So that's really awesome. You guys are helping support the cost of the show so much. So from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for that. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/the Astrocast. So what have you guys been up to? I know that in Charlotte, we have been through an absolute hellhole of a heat wave this past week. So we actually hit a record high temperature. I know on the heat index a day or two ago, it said it was 111 degrees. That's not normal. That is not normal at all. And it's just getting so stupid hot everywhere. I did manage to get down to the observatory on Monday night, and as the sky gods blessed us. It was actually a really beautiful night. It got cool enough out to where no one was sweating. There weren't a lot of bugs out. It was new moon, which is awesome. Every time I go down to the observatory, I generally try to do it around new moon because I want to see the Milky Way, and that's when it's the most visible, obviously. So that's when I generally go. And we've got like Bortle 4 skies down there, so very good skies compared to what I have here in Matthews. So while I was down there, I ran into a few friends. If you aren't a member of your local observatory, I would highly encourage you to join. If you're like me and you're in your, late 30s, early 40s, or, even if you're not in your 30s or 40s, if you're in your 20s or even teens these days, it can be difficult to make good friends. It's hard finding like-minded individuals in this world. It's funny because as much connection as we have now through social media and instant messaging and everything else, the more disconnected that we feel, it seems like. And it's just hard to connect with people that have the same kind of hobbies and interests that you may. And I have found many friends since I've joined the observatory that indeed have a lot of the same hobbies and interests that I do, which is super cool. And I ran into a couple of them while I was there. Debbie was out. She is a lady, her and her husband actually purchased an RV, and it's called Nebula. And they take it on trips, and it's kind of their mobile observatory. They can sleep in it. It's got a bathroom. It's really cool. And it's actually got me rethinking my initial plan to purchase land up in the darker part of North Carolina up towards the mountains. And I'm actually considering an RV now as well, because, if I had an RV, I could take that to any star party across the nation. So I could go to Okie, Tex and stay for a week and not have to pay for a hotel. I know that they have, camping arrangements, et cetera. You don't necessarily have to have an RV, but hey, it sure would be nice to have one, right? And there are some downsides too, as well. Obviously, you do have to pay for maintenance and upkeep, but I'm just imagining how much maintenance and upkeep would be on an entire property versus an RV. And it's something that I'm definitely thinking about. So it's nothing I can do this year or anything. It'll be 2 or 3 years in the future before I'm able to even consider such a thing. And a lot of that will depend on the child situation, because me and my wife are trying to have a baby. So depending on how all that turns out will kind of foretell the future. So anyway, I was helping Debbie out, and she had her, she's got an AVX mount that had a beautiful William Optics telescope on it. And she had that pointed up at the Pelican Nebula, I believe. And then she was taking her first shots of the Milky Way that were tracked using her Star Adventure Pro, or Star Adventure GTI rather. And I have that same mount, so I was, excited to get her take on it. And she had initially said she wasn't that big of a fan, but I think she honestly just hadn't had enough time to mess with it. Because I told her, like, when I first got it, I wasn't really too sure about it either. But after I figured out exactly how it works and got it dialed in, I get phenomenal guiding out of that little mount. It's not uncommon at all for me to get all the way down to like 0.5 RMS auto guiding. So that's pretty great, all things considered. But I helped her out because she was having some issues. She's still learning how the ASI air works and everything. So I was trying to, be my tech assistant help guy role that I'm so used to playing, that I do in real life as well. And I gave her a hand with that. And she had a 14 millimeter lens set up on her, I believe it was a Nikon camera. I think it was a Nikon, because I would have known it better if it was a Canon. So I helped her with that, and we got it all rolling eventually. And I had my Star Adventure GTI out as well that night, but I was doing something a little bit different. I decided to see if I could do tracked shots of the Milky Way core area from 24 to 70 millimeters, because that's what my fancy new lens is that I wanted to give a whirl. And I had basically turned the declination mount on its side and then put a Vixen rail like in between, where it clamps down. And then on the one side, I have the R5, And on the other side, I mounted my guide scope as well as the ASI air. So the weight was a little bit better balanced. Um, and it took a little while, but I eventually got it all set up and connected correctly. And the ASI air immediately recognized the Canon R5, which was really cool because I remember whenever I first plugged in my R7 a year or two ago, it had issues recognizing it. So it did not have any issues at all with the R5. It came right up, and it took me a little bit of time, but I eventually got it guiding and plate solving, etc. I got the guide scope focused in, and it's funny though because I finally kind of got everything working correctly, but then I would run into another issue. And then I ran into another issue, and while trying to fix these issues, I was going back and forth and helping Debbie with hers because she was running into issues. And then later on in the evening, I ran into my friend Ayush, who was down playing with another one of the telescopes. He was running into issues, and come to find out, like everybody that night had issues. All of us. I think I came away with pretty much no usable data. And I was there from, before sundown, and I left after 1 a.m. So, generally when I go down there, I will be up and running within 15 minutes, and I image on one target the entire time I'm there. But for whatever reason, I just kept running into issues. Like my guiding would be messed up, or the camera wasn't cooling, so it had to restart or recalibrate the guiding, or this, that, the third. Oh, I remember at one point the R5 was timing out after it dithered, because it had to, whenever you have dithering enabled, it moves your mount a few pixels after every shot, and then it has to settle. And since it wasn't sending an expose command to the R5 was like, oh, it's been 20 seconds, time to turn the screen off. And then everything was just screwed at that point. So it was funny because I haven't had one of those nights in astronomy in, gosh, probably 2 years. I mean, I'm generally pretty good at getting set up and, rocking and rolling. And it just goes to show you those kind of nights can happen to all of us, and they will, especially if you're new. That's something to keep in mind. When you're new, you're going to run into so many issues when you're out in the field. Particularly like when I say out in the field, I mean like not at your home where you normally set up, because, when I'm at home, my garage is right there. I got all my tools. If anything happens, I can just sit down for a second, gather my thoughts, and then I'm good, But when you're out in a field or at your observatory, you're a little bit outside of your comfort zone, and that can really throw you off. It's funny how much it can throw you off, in fact, but it really does. So I wanted to talk to you guys today about light pollution, because I actually met with a friend of mine, Debbie, who recorded an episode of her podcast, which I discussed a little bit last week or 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I told you I was going to record an episode, and I did end up recording it. It went very well, but I thought, we've touched on this topic a few times on the Astrocast, but we haven't really dedicated an episode to light pollution. And I really feel like it is a big enough issue that it is absolutely worth having the talk about it. And if nothing else, maybe you can gather a couple of talking points to give to your family and friends and what have you, so you can talk to them about, what they can do to help us reduce light pollution and help animals. If they don't care about astronomers, maybe they care about birds, maybe they care about dung beetles. All of these things get affected by light pollution. So not only is light pollution a proven cause of heightened stress levels, blood pressure, bad circadian rhythms in humans, but it throws off the entire animal kingdom as well. And I mean, from top to bottom, light pollution from cities, from states, from countries, it plays an awful role in nature. So I'll give you a few examples. I mentioned the dung beetle a few moments ago. A few years back, a group of researchers discovered dung beetles when they gather together, a ball of dung, which is what they do. I'm sure you've seen the image of a dung beetle rolling a ball of poop. Um, well, anyway, they guide using the Milky Way. So they look at the line of the Milky Way overhead, and they actually use that as a guide for how to stay in a straight line, because the dung beetle that can stay in the straightest line and, push the ball farthest without messing up is a more attractive mate to the female dung beetle, because obviously they have better vision, better coordination, etc., and that makes them a more attractive partner. So something as small as a dung beetle uses the Milky Way to guide. And then you take that away from them, what does that do to your ecosystem? Where something that small goes away and has that big of an impact. But it's not just that. Birds use the stars to migrate from south to north. That's a well-known fact, and it has been for a long time. And they are not able to properly migrate if the city pollution is too bad. In fact, there have been cases where birds will just circle bright buildings for hours and hours and hours because they're confused and they don't know where they're going. And they will literally fall out of the sky from exhaustion and oftentimes die when they hit the ground, especially if they're up very high, which they oftentimes are if they're circling a skyscraper. Then you have things like sea turtles. Baby sea turtles actually use moonlight to walk out to the ocean. They use it to guide them. The reflections off the water are a key indicator for them right when they're born. And if they don't see that moonlight reflecting off the water because there's too much city light coming from behind them right after they hatch, they can get confused and walk away from the ocean. And then obviously they don't make it. I don't think anybody wants to kill baby sea turtles. I'm just going to go ahead and say that now for the record. No one wants baby sea turtles dead. So we can do a lot, though. That's the good news. So there's, a lot of gloom and doom around light pollution. And do I realistically think within the next 5 years we're going to solve the problem? No, I don't. I'm not that naive. But if each and every one of us who listens to this told 2 or 3 people about it, and they all told 2 or 3 people about it, and then it carried on from there, we could have a real measurable impact on the amount of light pollution that is affecting our night skies. Because at the rate that we are going right now, your grandkids won't be able to see the night sky. I think I can't remember the exact percentage, but I know it's something like 10 to 20% increase per year in light pollution year over year, the way we're going right now, which is just like a terrifying number. I already can only see, a couple dozen stars from my yard, and I'm in a 7, which is very typical for urban and metropolitan areas. I say 7, I'm sorry. In case you guys don't know, I'm referring to the Bortle scale. We mentioned it many, many, many times on this show. John Bortle actually invented it back in, I think it was 2003. Popular Science first reported on it, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, the point is it's a scale that measures light pollution on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is the darkest of dark skies. You're in the Atacama Mountains in Chile on top of a mountain. That's a 1. And then 10 would be Manhattan, on a holiday with all the buildings lit up as bright as they can go, and all you can really see are planets and the moon. That's all you can see at night. That's going to be a 10. So the vast majority of us in the urban and suburban environments that we live in these days are somewhere between 6 and 8. I'm right slap dab in the middle at a 7. And I got to tell you, it's not cool here. Particularly after you make a trip out to a true dark sky site, which is something I encourage everybody to do at some point in their life. because I'll tell you, I was 38 years old when I saw the Milky Way for the first time. Let that sink in for a sec. 38 years old. I'm an astronomer. I'm 38. I've always been somewhat interested in the stars. I got really big into them 4 or 5 years ago. But to be the age that I am and never having seen the Milky Way before is kind of crazy if you think about it. So, just something to consider. But anyway, with that being said, what can we do to fix this problem? There are a lot of little things that we can do. Some are simple, some are more complex, but I would think the vast majority of these anybody can do. And when you're thinking about light pollution and how to, help reduce the issue, don't think about just at home. It's really important that we think about our businesses too, because there are a lot of small businesses in America, North America, all across the world, Europe as well, if you're listening, Australia. I know I got a few people down there that are listening. Our businesses give off a ton of light pollution. In fact, I'd be willing to bet they give off a lot more than residential areas do, particularly with like the advertisements and billboards and things like that. So anyway, simplest steps that you can start to take at home: install motion detectors wherever you can. So if you can't turn your lights off, excuse me for a moment. All right, sorry about that. If you can't turn your lights off, go ahead and install motion detectors, because then they will be off until something moves across them. And usually it's going to be wildlife, a deer, bird, something like that in my yard. But I get it. We're all worried that a criminal might come into our yard and we want to know if he does. There you go. Honestly, a motion detection light is going to let you know something is there way more than a regular light ever would. Just think about it. Your regular light, it's on all the time, right? And you can think of it as a deterrence, I suppose, but it's not really, if it's always on, because you're not going to see it flash. Therefore, you're not going to know if somebody actually walks in. And not for nothing, but in this day and age that we're living in, cameras are so cheap. You can buy a 4-pack of Blink cameras that are wireless and have built-in night vision for like $200. You can buy even less expensive ones. So if it's crime that you're worried about, consider getting cameras, because they'll actually record and alert you if somebody's in the yard, as opposed to a light, which isn't going to do anything except help the criminal see better for where he's trying to get in. So it's a good argument to use with, neighbors and friends. Obviously, I know when I'm talking to you guys, you probably already handled your homes and businesses. I would certainly hope, but these are mainly talking points to give family members and those sorts of things. So, all right. So what if you don't want to do motion sensor lights and you want to have a light on all night long, no matter what? Okay, that's fine. You can do that. But let's make sure that we don't use blue LEDs. So you're talking your really high color temperature, like 6,000 and up, the bright blue, the ones that when you pass a car on the street and they completely blind you because they're so bright and blue. Those are the lights that we don't want to use for lighting the outside of our homes and businesses, because they contribute a lot more to light pollution than your warm lights do. So when I say warm lights, I mean like yellow lights. They have a much lower color temperature in the 4,000 range on the Kelvin scale, and that is going to be much easier on the eyes and ultimately not bleeding as much light into our night sky. You can dim them. That's another excellent thing you could do. But instead of even worrying about dimming, try buying a lower wattage bulb. So instead of getting the 80 or 100 watt bulb, consider a 40 watt bulb. Once your eyes are night adjusted, 40 watts is going to be more than enough to see most things like at your porch and what have you. Okay, so what else can you do short of swapping out your cold blue bulbs for nice warm bulbs? You could use smart bulbs. Smart bulbs are awesome because you can set them up on timers. You can have your Alex A device, if you see what I'm saying there. Turn them on and off. We always say Alex in my house whenever we're referring to the smart assistant, but we don't want to trigger it. We'll say, Alex, da 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 da. But anyway, you can, if you have smart lights, you can turn those on and off using your voice. Like we have our porch lights set up to turn on and off by just saying, turn on the porch lights, turn off the porch lights. And then you can set them up on schedule. So, why do you need your lights on between midnight and 5 a.m.? Do you really need lights on between midnight and 5 a.m.? You probably think that you're just deterring criminals. But the reality is criminals are not deterred by a front porch light. They're just not. So motion sensors, warm lights, shielding. That's another important thing we need to do. So a lot of lights are just aimed improperly. You will see where they are aimed up at the sky. You see this at businesses a lot. I see this in parking lots a whole lot where the lights aren't properly shielded and they should have a hood around them, around the bulb, and that should be aiming the light towards the ground or whatever area that you are attempting to light up. What you don't want is a light that's pointing out horizontally and then having half of that light, bleed straight up into our night sky, because that is not good. We do not want that. So shielding the lights and aiming them properly is another huge thing that we can do. So keep that in mind. And like I say, these are just little talking points that you can share with your family and friends. And if we could all do it, man, just imagine the impact we could have. All right. Sorry, I had to reset the camera there. Another little issue with having the podcast be a video as well now. So fun stuff. But yeah, light pollution, it's a big deal. It is the only type of pollution that is completely and instantly reversible. You can't say that about any other pollution in the world. Maybe sound pollution, but I don't know if that's true. I don't know if you could completely and instantly reverse sound pollution, because there's so many industrial things that are going to make sound that we can't just say, okay, we're no longer going to run our mills anymore, because there's nothing we can do about that. Airports, for example, okay, we won't fly anymore and that'll stop sound pollution. That's not going to happen. But turning lights off, we can do that. We can absolutely do that. So talk to your friends, talk to your family, and let's work together, man. I found out Debbie, the person that I went on the podcast, the Backyard Naturalist, for a week ago, she actually got our town of Matthews to commit to a reduction in light pollution by showing up to one of the town meetings with actual data. And they haven't done anything yet, but they have committed to doing it, so it's a start at least. She's actually told me that she's gonna kind of make that a point of interest for her over the next year. And I think I'm going to climb on that mountain with her, because I would love to see if we can get the skies a little bit darker around here. We have this huge, installation of apartment buildings and stores and restaurants all going in just like half a mile from my house. And we already have so much junk in this area. Like anything you could ever want, you can get to within 5 minutes. I'm like, y'all got to build another giant shopping center, but that's what they're doing. So that's going to make the light pollution even worse, unfortunately. So we're going to have to keep our eyes peeled for that. But maybe if we can get the town officials to agree to, turn off the hospital lights at night, or, something like that, it's a start. Get a few buildings and then go from there. Another thing you can do is talk to your neighbors about it, particularly if you live in a neighborhood. And hear me out here. I've been thinking a lot of the people in my neighborhood now know that I'm an astronomer, because they drive by my house. They see that I'm outside with telescopes. And, if it's a nice evening and I'm just getting set up before sundown, a lot of times people will stop and chat with me. oh, what are you looking at tonight? Or is Jupiter out? Are you looking at the rings on Saturn? It's usually the planets. But I'll sit and speak with them for a few moments and just talk about what I do. And that kind of, gets in their head that, hey, there's astronomers in this neighborhood. And what my goal is to have those conversations with enough people. And then maybe at the entrance to the neighborhood, just putting up a little poster board saying it's, new moon week. Please turn off your lights at 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. to be a good neighbor. Simple as that. Have a star party, invite the kids over throughout the neighborhood, let them look through the telescopes, let them see the rings of Saturn for the first time. You do a couple little things like this, and before you know it, everybody's on board. And I'm telling you, it works because my neighbor who lives right beside me, I had a good conversation with him when he first moved in. And yeah, he turns all his lights off now. We have a whole dim little area on our street. And the only time my lights are on is when I have my red lights on, which my front of house lights are hue bulbs where I have them on the left and right side of the garage. And I turn them red because, we're astronomers and red is easier on the eyes if you have to have light. But it's good to have those when I'm setting up my telescope and what have you. So, but yeah, if you were to like drive by our house, you'd be like, why are those two houses so dark? If you didn't know any better. And, the more you talk to your neighbors, if you're nice about it and you approach it in a friendly way and, understand them too. If there is a reason that they feel like they need to have their lights on, don't argue it. Because, there could be deeper psychological issues there that you don't want to dive into. Who knows what people have been through? Everybody's been through something and we're all struggling with our own problem. Right. So, but I say that also because I've got a friend who had a neighbor who started turning his lights on all the time while he was outside trying to look at the stars. And, I just asked him if he'd ever talked to the guy about it and actually like explain. And he was like, I actually haven't. And he went over and had a chat with him. And sure enough, the guy started turning his lights off for him. Not all the time, but when he would ask, when he would say, hey, I'm going to be out with my telescope tonight. Would you mind turning off your lights? He would absolutely do it. A lot of times you can get their phone number and just text them and they don't mind, Heck, if they ever want to come by and look at your telescope, just let them. And that way you got a nice even trade. So that's pretty much it for light pollution, I think, for this week. I did want to cover the topic a little bit more thoroughly than we have in the past, just because it is such an important topic to astronomers. We can't really do much about all the satellites going up. I know that in the grand scheme of things, they're not that important to us because, when we use weighted batch pre-processing, it filters out all the light from your subs if you're stacking, nebula photos. But I don't know. I know that that's the case. And yet I still I can't stand it when I get like 5 satellite trails in one photo. It really worries me. And what is it called? Kepler syndrome, I believe. That's like the description of the catastrophe that can happen in space with the more satellites that you add. So essentially, the idea behind it is if you've got 20,000 satellites in space orbiting Earth, and one of them strikes another and then breaks apart, those pieces run into 4 more satellites, and then those break apart, and then those break apart. And it's a terrible chain reaction where it keeps getting worse and worse. And before you know it, there's so much space debris around our, atmosphere that it's impossible for us to shoot a rocket through safely. And then you're trapped. And I'm not saying human ingenuity couldn't figure out a way to get out of a situation like that, but do we really want to put ourselves in that situation in the first place? I think Elon Musk says he wants to launch like another 50,000 satellites to his constellations within the next few years. They're already talking about advertising via satellites. Could you imagine the disgust of looking up and seeing Hardee's in just giant space letters. Ugh. Do you know Sony owns a patent where with their smart TV, this is actually true. This is the funniest thing. So they own a patent that will let you skip ads by shouting the brand name. Pepsi. Just shouting Pepsi at your television at 3 a.m. Pepsi. Pepsi. That would be freaking hilarious. But God, I hope it doesn't come to that, because that is such a dystopian hellhole that I do not want to be a part of at all. Sorry, talking so much gets my throat dry and I have to pause to take a little sip of water here and there. So, yeah, the satellites are not great. But you know, it is what it is. I don't think we can do too much about that yet, but I know that we can do a whole lot about light pollution. So keep that in mind. What's going on in the night skies right now? Well, we've got planets starting to become visible again. As we said, we're at a new crescent moon. It's super pretty. Wake up, early in the morning, or right before sunset. Check it out. Or right after sunset, I should say. It looks like this week, Venus and Mercury are kind of what is it called? Occultated to the left and right of the moon just after sunset, which is really cool. And it's looking west-northwest, like towards the area of Castor and Pollux, which are still visible just barely on that west-northwest horizon just after sunset. So you can check that out this week. That's pretty cool. And then there's actually a really cool asteroid that is visible. And I think it's the biggest known asteroid. What is it? 1 Ceres. Yeah, so it's at opposition in the handle of the Sagittarius teapot. So it's magnitude 7.3. So it is in binocular range. So if you've got binoculars, you should be able to find it. So definitely check that one out. It should be, like I say, visible in your binoculars, and a super fun thing to take an image of if you're doing astrophotography. I've actually been thinking more and more about photographing asteroids and comets in astrophotography. Obviously, I've done, several comets over the years. Anytime there's a comet in the news, I always try to, get a photo of it. Some are better, some are not as good. I kick myself so hard for missing Neowise, because I got heavily into astronomy just after Neowise. Actually, right when I was getting back into astronomy, I knew Neowise was up, but I didn't know enough about astronomy to even consider like waking up super early in the morning and going somewhere with a low horizon. I just wasn't there yet in my journey. And I hate that, because it was the last, great comet, and we haven't had another one since. We had the God, I can't even remember the name of it. Not Pons Brooks, but the one that we had last year. Everybody took a ton of photos of it, including myself. And that was good, but still not a great comet. I wonder often when we're going to have our next, Halley's or Hale-Bopp, you know what I mean? Something really, truly impressive that will be highly visible and not just right on the horizon, just before sun's down or just after sunrise. That seems to be how it always goes. But, we can't control the heavens. They come to us when they're ready in due time. And that's just how it is. So, that being said, we are thick and heavy into Milky Way season. Last show, we went over a lot of cool nebula targets that you can check out in the Milky Way. And I hope that you guys have been doing that. I actually imaged the Elephant Trunk Nebula the other day. And it came out pretty cool. I'll actually, you know what? I'll put it up on the screen over here if you guys want to see the image. That'll be pretty fun to do. And just a reminder, if you guys want to have me display your image throughout the show for the video version on YouTube, email me your photos. So you can email them to ruastrocast@gmail.com. or feel free to send them to my photography website, which is roo@qcroo.com. That's Q as in Queen, C as in City, roo@qcroo.com. ROO is Roo. But anyway, shoot me those photos if you want, and I will put them up in the background. They won't be used for anything else. Scout's honor. But anyway, if you want to have them displayed, just shoot them my way. But yeah, the Elephant Trunk Nebula. I had shot it before on my 80 millimeter doublet a couple of times. And as you all know, if you're longtime listeners of the show, I now have a 135 millimeter rig for the Rokinon 135, which I absolutely love. It is a very, very cool setup on the Star Adventure GTI. I had to kind of put it back together because whenever I went down to the observatory on Monday night of last week, I had to take basically everything apart because I used the GTI for the RFI, yada, yada. But anyway, I put the rig back together and I went outside and I picked the Elephant Trunk Nebula because it was already, nice and visible. I had excellent guiding the whole time. I stopped the lens down to f2.8, which I tend to do with that Rokinon 135 lens, just because I feel like if you leave it at f2, the stars aren't really that sharp, and sharp stars are very important to me, particularly after a blur exterminator. You want them to look good too. So anyway, did that. And I was able to image for 1 hour on the target, which isn't much. Most people don't even bother posting a photo if it doesn't have at least 4 hours of integration, right? But it was an hour narrow band at f2.8. So it was, sucking in them photons, if you know what I mean. And it actually came out really good. I was actually very happy with the end result for what it was. I did a Hubble palette on it for the color, narrow band imaging. I actually used Luco Matico. He came up with another awesome duoband tutorial for PixInsight, and he gives you access to all the tools and everything. I've shouted him out on the show before. Another shout out to you, Luke. Thank you for all the awesome work that you do. And I'll link to his video as well in the show notes if you want to check that out. But anyway, he had an excellent tutorial. I took my time and really went through it, used all the tools that he had linked to for getting the dual narrowband channels to stand out separately, your oxygen and your hydrogen. And it came out beautiful. So I'm really, really happy with that. And I was using my 294 MC Pro. I forgot to mention, I don't even know if I've talked to you guys about it yet, but I did get the 585 MC Pro. And that camera has really impressed me. So that's, if you don't know, that's ASI or ZWO, right? Yeah, ZWO ASI 585 MC Pro. That's a mouthful. But anyway, that's their new budget cooled astronomy camera. And I have been kind of blown away by the quality of it. It's really a good camera. It's got like a 4K sensor on it. So it does 4,000 by 2,900 or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact resolution off the top of my head, but it's got a small sensor, obviously, for that price, which is $599 US to be clear. And it does, since it's a small sensor, it crops in a little bit more than I would get with my 294 MC Pro. So I actually ended up putting it on my 80 millimeter refractor because I wanted to be able to get a closer view on some of the objects that I like to look at through the 80 millimeter refractor. And I was blown away with how good it looked. So I'm glad I got good tracking on my mount. That's an Ioptron CEM26, which is an awesome little mount. I love that mount. It's been great. I know they make one with encoders too that I saw on High Point a couple of weeks ago, but anyway, that closer up view, just due to the, cropped nature of the sensor, the smaller your sensor, the more it kind of crops in on the view. Anyway, zooms in on the view if you're new to photography. It just looks really good and it gives me a much closer view. If you plug it into Stellarium, which is a free planetarium software that you can use to look at your night sky. But more importantly for me, it lets you visualize what your sensor size, what the specific telescope is going to look like on any given target. And plug that in if you have something like an 80 millimeter and you're thinking about getting a secondary camera. I would love to see what it could do with something with a little bit longer focal length. My 80 millimeter is only like 448 millimeters when it's got the reducer on. I've never tried it with the reducer off. I don't think I would, just because I've heard that the corners are so awful if you take it off. And, being a astrophotographer, obviously want pretty corners because that's something that we strive for. But I wonder what it would look like with something like like 1,000 millimeter focal length. If you were really reaching in, I do wonder if that could look, significantly, better and more zoomed in. Something like the pillars, maybe at 1,000 on that camera. That would be awesome. I would love to see that. So I got a really cool kind of wide field shot of the pillars when I was on my dark sky trip. Maybe I can put it over here and show you. And that was one of my favorites. I did kind of I'll admit, a little bit of a funky color scheme on that one, but I really do like the way that it came out. And I am a firm believer in astrophotography of being able to experiment a little bit with your artwork. Like, don't get me wrong, I love going for as realistic color combinations as possible, but it's fun to have fun sometimes too, guys. And it's perfectly okay. If you want to make hydrogen blue or make oxygen gold, or, well, oxygen is gold sometimes. You get my point, though. If you want to play around with the colors, play around with the colors and make your image look as beautiful as you think it should look. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because if someone's hating on your images because you colored them the way you wanted to, then they probably shouldn't be looking in the first place. The one exception is oversaturation. Don't do that. Don't be the guy who oversaturates your photos, because you'll get yelled at and then they won't want to look at your pretty pictures. So anyway, I'll get off my pedestal. So building the observatory, little update on that. I'm going to order the pier supplies in the next couple of weeks. I've got the spot picked out, and I'm quite happy to say that I actually do have a pretty decent view of the southern sky from where I am. Like right now I can get the lagoon, and I can get, all of Scorpio. So I can, get Roe and lagoon and Trifid. I can't get the cat spa where I am. Obviously that's too low. But considering how many trees there are in the southern part of my yard, I'm quite happy to be able to get all of Scorpio and the lagoon, because, a lot of times people can't when they build their observatories, because you're at the mercy of your trees, right? Luckily, I don't have a single tree in my yard, like at all. But my neighbors obviously have trees, so I have to contend with those. So I'm hoping to get the pier installed in the next couple of weeks. And then once that's done, start laying foundations. So that's the plan. Maybe I could be happy with my home observatory for a while. I need to talk to the guys down at the observatory in South Carolina, the Charlotte Club, and see if and when they're planning on pouring more pads, because I could definitely get on with that. Speaking of the heat wave that we had here over the last week and are still going through, when I was at the club, I ran into my friend Ayush, who I hadn't seen in a while, and we were talking about how hot it was. And he said something to me that really stuck with me. He said, "This is the coldest summer you'll ever experience again for the rest of your life." And unfortunately, I think he's right, the way things are going. And it really sucked hearing that and then thinking about it. And just, I don't know, things just are bad and getting worse. When I was a kid in Charlotte, we would get snow pretty much every year. And I remember, in fact, there were often so many snow days that they would threaten to take away our spring break because, oh, you missed too many, school days of snow. We're going to take away spring break. I don't think they ever actually did it, but the fact that they talked about it means that we got, nearly a week of snow days every single winter. And we haven't had snow in 3 years now in Charlotte, like not even trace amount. Something's not right there. So take that for what you will, but hopefully we can all improve as human beings and make the world better. So let me think for a recommendation this week. Actually, I gave you Dungeon Crawler Carl last week, and that's kind of hard to top because Dungeon Crawler Carl is awesome. I'm about 70-80% through the first book on Sound Booth Theater at this point, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that. Let me go back to an earlier one. This is one of I think it might have been the first recommendation that I actually gave on this show, but I think it is worth mentioning one more time just because it is such a good book that I feel like everybody should read it. And in case you are new to the show and didn't hear that recommendation, I would like to point it out for you. So the book is called The Last Stargazers, and it is by Dr. Emily Levesque. It's an amazing book that tells a lot of awesome stories about astronomers. It talks about discoveries they made, talks about historical astronomers, talks about modern day astronomers. It talks about her getting her first job in an observatory and what she thought it was like versus what it actually was like when she got there. And it's the kind of thing that'll inspire you to go back to college. It's that good of a book. So I'm a really big fan of Dr. Levesque, and one of my goals is to one day have her as a guest on this show. So hopefully we'll be able to do that one day. But until then, let's go ahead and shout out her book. And I encourage you all to give it a read. It's on Audible. If you're like me, I listen to a ton of audiobooks. I love audiobooks because I'm always doing something with my hands, but I can't always sit down and read, so an audiobook gives me the opportunity to get just as much information when I'm on the move as I otherwise would or wouldn't be able to, rather. So definitely check that out, The Last Stargazers by Emily Levesque. So guys, I hope that you have enjoyed this week's episode. I know a little bit different. This is a little bit of a catch-up episode. We are still working on the calibration frames episode. I think I've just about got all of the info together that I want on that. I've just been running some tests with and without calibration frames over the last couple of weeks, and I've kind of been surprised with some of the results. I won't get into it right here and now, but yeah, surprising results. I've always taken calibration frames throughout my astrophotography career, and going through and not using any darks or flats or bias frames for the first few times, spoiler alert, but I was kind of shocked at how good some of the photos can be, particularly if you have very clean glass and you're able to reduce gradients before you start imaging. We'll get more into that though when we get into the calibration episode, and stay tuned for that. So again, if you would like to support the show, if you've enjoyed this and you want to join our members only Discord, where we will probably be having our first members only star party soon, because we're finally getting close to that magical number that I have in mind to get everybody together and have kind of a digital star party. Still working out the details, how it's going to work, but basically we'll set up a telescope. We'll have a live stream going of the telescope. We'll have a live stream going of what we're looking at, and then we can all pick targets together and go through them on the Discord. And I think it'll be a really fun time. So if you want to become a member, patreon.com/the Astrocast. We have levels at $1 and $5 per month. So definitely check that out. My website has relaunched. That is qcru.com. I'm adding more and more photography there every day. So definitely check that out. If you want to email the show, if you have a question, comment, suggestion for a future episode, please feel free to email me, ruastrocast@gmail.com. So that is going to do it for us this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in. My name is Rue. You have been listening to the Astrocast. Clear skies.